we'll get. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Announcers Hour podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCall. Today we have Nick Marino joining me on the pod. He's the former sports director of WVUM at the University of Miami, so I know he's going to have a lot of wonderful insight. And Nick, get started. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. Appreciate you having me on. Feel honored to be on here with some of the people that have came before me. So thank you for having me.
And where are you located now? What have you been up to since graduating just like literally weeks ago?
Yeah, so I graduated about a month ago now, but then stayed down in Miami and then went to Charlotte with a team for the ACC tournament where we were able to make a run. Ended up losing to Duke in the ACC tournament semifinals. But now I'm just actually back up in Maine, where I'm from originally. Got back here about 10 days ago. So kind of just hanging out here, working a summer job and kind of just figuring out what my next step is going to be in this kind of crazy broadcasting landscape.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult industry to get into. So we all know the grind about getting out there. But, what was your final broadcast like with WVUM?
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Being in Charlotte with Jay Monty was an absolute pleasure. The situation Miami was in, having to win the tournament to make the NCAA tournament, added a lot of suspense to every game, every pitch, every inning. Miami was able to pull out a couple of really exciting wins versus Louisville and then Clemson, and then had a lead late, 2-1 in the seventh inning, I believe, versus Duke in the ACC tournament semifinals. Duke was able to make a push at the end, but it was definitely bittersweet having my WVUM career kind of come to an end there in Charlotte. Was an absolute pleasure as always to be there and to broadcast three games with myself and Jay was a great experience, but definitely bittersweet to see my WVUM career come to an end.
Yeah, and I can't recall if I think I know I want to say Cal we've had as a prior guest was one of the people on the 23 Canes baseball tournament run. Were you on that? And do you at that being said, has the tournament been one of your favorite places to go to with WVUM?
Yeah, so I was actually up in Rochester in the Northwoods League for the 23 run. But so that was kind of a different situation in the season that Miami had when they were hosting the Coral Gables Regional was kind of a different feel, I guess, to the exit of this season. With kind of the way the season went down this year, Miami wasn't really expected to make a run in the ACC tournament. So even get into the semifinals and having that game versus Duke, razor thin margins for 8 innings was a great experience and definitely one of the highlights of my career. Truist Field in Charlotte, if anyone listening has not been there, definitely a park that should be on your list. The AAA field for the Charlotte Knights, absolutely one of the best minor league ballparks you'll come across, and absolutely beautiful spot, kind of nestled right in downtown Charlotte, with the skyline outside of the outfield. It's a beautiful spot to be.
And now, do you have a champion picked out? You think in this NCAA tournament, because half the teams are from the ACC and the other half the SEC. So you've seen maybe a good amount of those teams at the tournament.
Yeah, I think I've seen I think all of them at this point. I think FSU has my pick. I think the combination of some of the bats they've got in their lineup, James Tibbs, the third ACC Player of the Year, and then you've also got Jamie Arnold, who, if it wasn't for Chase Burns, would have been the ACC Pitcher of the Year as well. So I think the combination of what they've got under Link Jarrett, they're my pick. But the ACC, or at least as I saw it, I'm sure you saw as a fan this year, was absolutely loaded, and that was part of the reason Miami, I think, kind of had a down year, is that they were playing all these teams that ended up in the College World Series almost every other weekend. Um, so it's going to be fun without a doubt. ACC, SEC, only two conferences in there is pretty crazy. I'm definitely excited to be tuned into that one. But as much as it pains me to say, I've got FSU, I think.
Yeah, and do you have a favorite game like ever that you called at Miami that you can recall count on?
Well, I think the easy answer would be the men's Final Four game versus UConn, courtside at NRG in Houston. Even though Miami lost, I think that game would be the easy answer, but one personal favorite for me would be I did a men's basketball game on the road, a solo broadcast at UNC in the Dean Dome 2 years ago, the year that Miami made it to the Final Four, and that was a really fun one. Miami come in as pretty decent underdogs, if I remember. It was the year that UNC didn't end up making the tournament after making it all the way to the national championship game, but that was when you would see it RJ Davis, Caleb Love, Baycott, obviously. That was a phenomenal game being in that type of arena and having the chance to broadcast that one solo from up on the second level. And Miami ended up winning that one. Nigel Pack and Jordan Miller had great games and hit some great shots. And that was an arena that always I watched on TV, the UNC Duke games and stuff like that, and was one that I always had on my list. So that's one that sticks out for me when I kind of think back of how lucky I was to able to go to all these different places. That UNC game is one that was pretty special for me.
Yeah, I know it's a unique situation with basketball, especially in the ACC. There's so many historic arenas, and getting back to the basics, I guess. I mean, what made you want to get into play-by-play? Like, did you know early on you wanted to do that before you arrived in Miami?
Yeah, so I knew for a while, but I think before I got to Miami that play by play is what I wanted to do. I mean, growing up and obviously now too, I'm just a massive sports fan. So I mean, sports has kind of consumed my life even before. It's something that I kind of dug my teeth into at Miami, and just from a young age, I've always just kind of had an attraction to play by play and the art of kind of telling the story of the game. To the viewers and especially on the radio, the listeners, being able to kind of dictate their experience. It's a big responsibility, and it's one that it's one that's very fun. I think kind of dictating how the viewers are watching the game and kind of their experience. So that's something that I've always kind of been attracted to. And then when I was looking at schools, of course, there are other factors, but one of the main factors that I was considering was what the play-by-play programs at these schools were like and what type of opportunities there were. And that's something that was awesome to me about Miami is that maybe on the national stage, it's not as known in terms of like a Syracuse or Arizona State or something like that. But I think something that's both of us really use to our advantage is that since the staff is a little bit smaller and there's still so many fantastic opportunities with being the flagship for women's basketball and baseball, along with football and men's basketball as well, is that you can really get a ton of opportunities. So that's one thing that I loved about Miami, and something that, like I said, both of us took advantage of is we were able to do absolutely incredible games, road trips with baseball and stuff like that, and Miami Hurricanes football games a year, 2 years after joining the station. So that's kind of a long answer, but yeah, I mean, picking Miami and getting the chance to be with WVUM was the best decision I could have possibly made.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like the people that have been to Miami can kind of speak on how, that community is with having the wider, staff and being able to get more opportunities, but hopefully it doesn't end up being like a self-fulfilling prophecy that this podcast grows, then people start applying to Miami, I don't know, and then gets too many people. But what are your ultimate goals in broadcasting, like moving forward, and where would you like to be going, and just even with play-by-play or adding anything else to that?
Yeah, so I think at this point, what my goal is and what I'll be trying to work towards is to stay in college athletics on the radio. I think that's something really over the last year and a half specifically is something that I've really fallen in love with is calling college sports on the radio and more specifically trying to end up being the voice of a school. So I think being synonymous with a school's big time moments and having your voice kind of become familiar in a community is something that's really appealing to me, and just getting the chance to kind of get comfortable in a town with a college and kind of with the staff. I mean, we got a taste of it, getting the chance to travel on the road for women's basketball and baseball and stuff like that. You really are part of the team, and you are felt like you're part of the team, and I think that's something that is really cool to me, and getting the chance to kind of tell the stories throughout an entire season of some players and coaches and staff and stuff like that is something that has really been a lot of fun for me at Miami and something that I think I would love to do down the road. So yeah, short answer, being the voice of a school would be the dream right now, and that's kind of what I'll try to be working towards.
Yeah, and is there like an appeal you think of college athletics over pro athletics that you think would be more beneficial, I guess, for broadcasting?
I guess the storytelling aspect of it in college, I think you can do a little bit more. I guess in the NIL and transfer portal era, there's not as much continuity on teams, maybe even as the pros now, with about 50% of players hopping in the portal every single year. Um, but I think in just in terms of college, kind of getting to tell the stories of those people and kind of seeing players and people grow as the season goes along. Obviously, being 18 to 22, 23-year olds now, you're really seeing these people develop not just as players throughout careers, but I mean, as young men and women as well. So I think that's also something that is pretty appealing about broadcasting college athletics. And I think the fan base aspect of it is pretty cool too. You get some of these big time schools and the fan bases are so loyal. I mean, we've seen it at Miami with baseball specifically, guys like Kathy and other people like that who will really appreciate your work and let you know that they appreciate your work. I don't think that's really something you get as much in the pros. So I think those are a couple reasons why I think college athletics would be pretty cool.
Yeah, and another thing, is there anyone that you have looked up to in play-by-play, reached out to, or been, kind of a mentor for you? Because I feel like that's usually a lot of people definitely learn when they reach out to others.
Yeah, no, 100%. One of the main one for me, or one of the main ones, is Evan Hughes at Virginia Tech. He was the Jim Nance winner, I think, 3 years ago now. So he's now on at Virginia Tech for women's basketball and baseball. So he's someone that I actually looked at Virginia Tech pretty closely in terms of a school that I thought about going to. So he's someone who I reached out to back then, 4 or 5 years ago now. When he was still a student broadcasting there at Virginia Tech. They've got one of the best programs in the country. And he's someone who I've stayed in close contact with, run into numerous times just across the ACC landscape. Saw him a couple weekends ago in Charlotte. So he's someone who has been a really, really close mentor to me. Absolutely one of the best in the business at already a young age, and kind of doing what I want to do, which is college sports on the radio. So he's one who sticks out, but I've been lucky enough to kind of talk to numerous people along the way, and you learn something new from everyone, and it's really valuable. I mean, as you know, in a business like this, to know as many people as you can and get advice from as many people as you can, because it's so competitive, and you never know who's going to help you out or who's going to tell you something that will end up working your way.
Yeah, and getting back to the actual art of play-by-play, do you remember your first broadcast with WVUM, or really even if it was before then, if you happen to have anything in high school, but I know those opportunities are harder. Do you remember your first broadcast and what that was like?
Yeah, so my first ever broadcast, I did like two just high school basketball games just for the high school down the road. It was me and like one of my best friend's dads actually kind of just hopped on, pretty much just had some fun. But I remember my first one at Miami was a women's soccer game versus Wyatt Kopelman, or with Wyatt Kopelman, should I say. WVUM legend. I just remember just thinking it was the coolest thing ever, getting to go and broadcast a game and sitting there with the equipment and everything like that. And I don't think I could have imagined at that point the kind of the places that I would be lucky enough to go after that. But yeah, I definitely remember those women's soccer and volleyball days starting out, as I'm sure you do as well. Those are really where you kind of get your feet wet at WVUM and kind of get comfortable on the mic and start improving with some valuable reps there too.
Yeah, and I think my first ever game in Miami was with you, but we since burned the tape for how bad that was on my end. And what's you think like your prep process like for, a game, and how does it change by sport?
Yeah, so I guess it changes by sport. Excuse me, more just kind of on the length and depth that you'll get into certain players. Because I mean, for a sport like football, right, you've got, especially in college, you've got 90 players, 90 plus players on a roster. So your prep process for football is going to be a little bit different than something like basketball or even baseball. But even baseball now the rosters um, are pretty big too. And for prep, I like to find the balance of course, having all the necessary information and stats in terms of specific players and teams, but also making sure to kind of understand the narratives and like the storylines along a game as well. Because if you just go super nitty gritty into the stats and the numbers like that, yes, of course, it's good to keep the listener or viewer informed, but you're not necessarily telling the whole story of the game. And that's some feedback that I've heard from a lot of people is making sure to let the listener know why this game is important. Why should they stay listening to your broadcast? What is at stake here, and kind of what was said, quotes from coaches before the games, and kind of like I said, storylines, things outside of just the nitty gritty numbers that make a game important. And that's something that kind of goes into all sports is emphasizing the meaning of a game to the listener and why they should stay with you. So of course you have the prep with the numbers and everything like that, but I think that's something that I maybe overlooked a little bit when I was starting broadcasting is keeping the listener engaged and keeping them informed on why they should be tuned in to a game.
Yeah, and that's a great, answer to mention with there's so many things you could basically get into and infinite information, but do you also, like if let's say you have a football game, that's obviously a big broadcast and takes a lot of time and prep for that. And so you'll also have time leading up. Do you have like certain days where you need to get stuff done? So like it's Monday, I need to have the names and numbers, Tuesday, interview a coach, like whatever it is. Do you have kind of a process for like specific sports?
Yeah, so I guess for football, if the game's on Saturday, I like to go through like players of one team Monday, or I guess maybe offense of both teams Monday, defense of both teams Tuesday. And then I guess for football, like stats, um, team stats Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, kind of watching film of the two teams, looking back at old games, coaches quotes, storylines, stuff like that. Football's a little bit different because you kind of have the whole week and you're kind of just looking towards the one game where basketball and then more specifically baseball, especially when you're out in a summer league like that, is you kind of got to turn it around. You kind of turn around a little bit quicker because you've got the broadcast going every day, right? So for basketball, it's a little bit different because you might only have 1 or 2, 3 days between each broadcast. And then especially for summer baseball like you're in right now, you're turning it over every day. So each sport is a little bit different, and I wouldn't say I have one cement process, I guess, for each sport. It is something that I'm still kind of working on and perfecting as you go along. You kind of figure out which prep works best for you. I think I've changed like the format that I use each year for basketball in terms of like the chart itself, because you kind of just get more comfortable with different ones and pull some stuff from different people like that.
Would you for baseball, heading back to your time with Rochester, because that was a bit different than Miami, because you're really kind of the voice of the Honkers and at least getting everyday reps anyway. And, what was your time there like, and what did you learn in that process?
I learned a ton, not only about broadcasting and improving as a broadcaster, but kind of what it takes to broadcast that type of summer baseball, whether it's Northwoods League, West Coast League, affiliated ball, minor league ball, stuff like that. You kind of realize as you're realizing right now, and as you did last summer, the kind of the day-to-day grind that it takes to broadcast that many games, in that short amount of time span. For me, it was 68 games in 78 days, and there was 3 week stretches without a day off. So you really learn kind of what it takes and what you have to do to prepare yourself to broadcast that many games in a row, and you kind of learn as well how to self-critique and how to improve in a short amount of time. So what I would do to kind of get better within each broadcast is we had some long bus rides. It was at least about 2 hours to every road game, and even if it was a home game outside of my other responsibilities, I'd have some time before the game. So I'd like to kind of use a balance of listening to other broadcasters that I admired, whether it was TV or radio guys, depending on if we were home, we were TV, on the road, we were radio. Striking the balance of listening to guys you admire, but then also going back and listening to yourself in previous games and listening back and taking down notes and figuring out what type of stuff you can do better. So that was one thing that I really learned a lot of is striking that balance of how do I best maximize my time where I'm of course doing all the responsibilities that I have to do outside of broadcasting and prep and stuff like that, but then also focusing on improving as a broadcaster because I mean over time, over a summer, you're going to improve regardless, just doing that many games. But I think having an intentional approach before each game on certain stuff you want to focus on or stuff like that, and not taking any rep for granted. So having an approach before a game of this is the stuff that I want to work on, or this is stuff that I want to pull from somebody that I respect in the industry, and then that way you're really taking advantage of each game and trying to improve as much as you can in the process.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to note about getting into that grind like early on and with being around the team so much, I think did you get any like great stories out of that? And I mean, how much like fun was the camaraderie? Because if a lot of people talk about, how that's their favorite memory of doing broadcasting or playing.
Yeah, I mean it was great being around a team for that long is I mean you really are part of the team. I mean it's a little bit different when we're at Miami. We're kind of substituting broadcasters in and out on different trips. So you don't necessarily have that feeling of camaraderie, but I mean out in Rochester it was me and my broadcast partner spending pretty much every hour of every day, not only together, but then around the team and I mean the group of interns that we worked with, we became pretty close just because kind of all the time we spent together and then being around the team and talking to the players kind of just in more relaxed settings you do get a sense of kind of some stuff you can work into a broadcast and also just I mean when you connect with them just as people and just as friends you kind of find that you find yourself just picking up on stuff that you can work into a broadcast. But for me, it wasn't like I was going in there when I talked to them as an interview, just looking for stuff to kind of use to my benefit. You go in there and you just have a casual conversation with them, and you kind of just chop it up, and then through that, you're able to kind of pull some stuff that you can use in the broadcast. But that was definitely one of the best memories was kind of being a part of the team and kind of learning a little bit how to act and how to carry yourself around a team like that and in a dugout and around coaches and stuff like that. That was also some pretty valuable stuff that I was able to learn and stuff outside of the mic in terms of trying to remain in an industry like this is so competitive is kind of what else can you do and how can you represent yourself just outside of the play by play because I mean so many people can do it. So it's how else can you put yourself in a positive situation is learning stuff like that, learning how to talk to people and learning how to act is definitely something that was valuable.
Do you remember having any crazy stretch or crazy story? Because there's a lot of like nitty-gritty everyday stuff that can go wrong or right when you're in especially like minor league or college level baseball over the summer when there's a crazy, everyone's trying to get the operation up and going.
I mean, we had some crazy trips. I mean, before the season, getting all the equipment ready was one thing, but I mean, we had some trips where doubleheader in Duluth, Minnesota. We were leaving the park at 4 or 5 a.m. For a doubleheader. We had a 9 hour trip to North Dakota. We had a 7 hour trip to Thunder Bay, Ontario for games. the trip to North Dakota, we're all sleeping on the bus back. We're driving through the night and get back to Rochester at about 6 a.m. So it was, I mean, there's moments like that that's a grind and kind of makes you appreciate what we had at Miami and kind of the chances that we had there. But really makes you kind of know what you're in for, and I mean what it's going to take to kind of to get reps up at that level. It's definitely a grind, but it's something that you kind of have to fall in love with if it's an industry that you want to pursue.
And did you have a favorite park really in that Northwoods League, and then also a stadium to visit in all your time in Miami?
For Miami, I think the favorite one that I went to was Russ Chandler Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. So that was the Georgia Tech baseball stadium. I was able to go there twice, once my sophomore year and then once back in late April, just about 6 weeks ago. That's an absolutely beautiful stadium. It's a walk away from the hotel we stayed at in Atlanta. Um, Kind of similar to Truist Field in Charlotte, just the backdrop of the city is terrific, terrific press box and stuff like that. Out in the Northwoods League, I think, let me think, there was definitely a wide range of stadiums that you get to, and a wide range of press boxes. Bismarck, North Dakota, had a really nice setup in terms of their press box and their outfield. All of right center is kind of like Wrigley Field with ivy on the fence. So that was a unique one, and that was one that was pretty cool. But I mean, I've been lucky enough at Miami and then in Rochester as well to kind of just travel all around, and you really get a feel for how different certain stadium and certain setups are. I mean, absolutely love the light in terms of everything it has, but you go to other spots in the ACC and across the country, and you realize that maybe specifically the press box setup and our setup out on the bench is not as nice as some other press boxes for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely, especially when you get into summer ball, there can be some setups that are not as easy to work with. I remember, speaking on that point in Quincy, we had no AC and pretty much a wooden box up
Oh,
there. And so, I mean, it can be, you're rugging it some days up there in the Midwest, but, you know, um, going off that, you've been on a lot of different platforms at this point. I know ACC, network with Miami baseball, ESPN Plus, and radio with WVUM. So, what is your approach like when there's, either radio or TV streaming, um, splitting that when you have to do a game for radio and a game for a TV or stream?
yeah, so you definitely have to change your approach. And you have to kind of be conscious of that because obviously radio and TV broadcasting are completely different things. So you definitely have to go in kind of with a different mindset. And especially, I mean, back this summer in Rochester, that was something that I was doing almost every other day was flip-flopping back and forth between TV and radio because our home games we did on TV on the Northwoods League network and then some on ESPN Plus, and then the radio streams were on Mixler. So that was something that kind of going back and forth each day. So you definitely have to have a different approach and more just be conscientious and just remember kind of what platform that you are on. That was something that this year in Miami, when I was lucky enough to get the 3 games on Network Extra, was something that I really had to kind of hammer into my brain before those because of course was going off just doing a whole bunch of games on the radio that year for VUM. And then you step on a TV and there's kind of the different things that you have to think about. But I think it's more just kind of knowing and kind of just having in the back of your head the different style that you have to have and the different approach that you have to have towards the game. And for those TV broadcasts, I mean, obviously instead of going back and listening to radio guys in my old radio tape, I would be listening to kind of the TV broadcasters that I look up to in baseball and went back and listened to some of my old TV games up in Rochester and kind of just you have to tweak your style a little bit. And you would think maybe going to TV is a little bit easier because you're kind of saying less. That's kind of maybe I thought for me was kind of a challenge because in radio you kind of know what you have to do and you know you have to describe everything that's going on. For TV, there's there's a lot more flexibility. So that has kind of there's not as much of, I guess, like a blueprint per se for what you have to do. So you kind of have a little bit more creativity in that aspect. But getting the chance to do both and a decent amount of games on both platforms has been great.
And now, with that being said, what are kind of do you feel like you have to have an obligation to story tell more like on television and have that fill more time and are you comfortable with talking through pitches or how much do you want to stick to calling like balls and strikes because there's always a tough balance you're trying to get through because the viewer can see but at the same time you're still trying to call the game.
Yeah, exactly. You definitely have a lot more freedom to work in storylines and even banter a little bit more with your color analyst on TV, just because I mean, especially in baseball, of course, on the radio, you're calling every pitch, so you have to kind of reset and be ahead a half second before every pitch. Or like you said in TV, you don't have to call every pitch, so you do have the flexibility to kind of talk through pitches that are going on, talking through storylines and stuff like that. But like you said, it's also striking the balance of you still have to kind of set the scene, and you still do have to kind of call some pitches just to keep the audience in the loop, of course. So that was one of the things that I focused on is and went back and watched and kind of really you don't really think about it when you're watching a game on TV. How many pitches the announcers are calling. So that's coming that before my games on Network Extra this year. Something I kind of went back and focused on is okay, how many pitches is this guy actually calling, and kind of tried to find that mix when I was doing games where you don't want to do every pitch because like you obviously the viewer can see what's happening, but you still want to place some sort of emphasis on the at bat and not just kind of glaze over it and talk about everything else that's going on between the two teams. But I definitely one part of doing TV games I did like was having that freedom to kind of make it a little bit more conversational with the color guy and be able to set the scene a little bit more about the game.
Yeah, and that's building off that I know one thing that with WVUM and with Rochester, pretty much everyone you're getting the reps with is, at your level trying to improve early on. But when you got on ACC Network Extra, I'm assuming you're with, a color commentator who was older and had maybe more experience or at least, played the game for such a long time. So what did you learn like in that role and getting someone that was or working with someone that was not in the same crowd as, us, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I was definitely not gonna lie, a little bit nervous going into the first one because, like you said, at WVUM in Rochester, you're working with play-by-play guys who, like you said, are at your level, and so it was kind of the first time that I'd worked on a game specifically with a color commentator who is older and who does color commentary. But I mean, I was lucky enough. I was with Andrew Lane. Who pitched for Miami back in the 2000s. I was with him, and then for two of the games, and one game actually with Javi Salas, who threw a perfect game for Miami. And they were both phenomenal to work with, and really helpful to be kind of bounce off of them and use their insight into the game to kind of make my play by play better and um, kept it casual with them, and I like kind of having conversations with them about the game. And Andrew and Javi both being former pitchers, they were really able to give good insight on pitches and pitch sequencing, and stuff like that. I mean, with their expertise, stuff that maybe not stuff that we could do, having not played the game at such a high level. So once I kind of got comfortable with it, which was pretty quickly, I was lucky enough for both of them to be really nice. It was definitely a really cool experience to kind of have that true color commentator who has all of that knowledge that you can use to kind of enhance the broadcast.
I was going to talk about your time as the sports director at Miami and what that was like, because a lot of people are out there, they might be looking into getting into sports broadcasting and they're going to see sports director roles, which comes with a whole lot. So I'm just wondering, what was your time like in Miami as a sports director? And can you talk about some of your duties doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to have that for 2 years. And it was nice, but my sophomore year, Brendan Riley, who was great and a great mentor and still is to me, passed that over to me after my sophomore year. So I kind of had 1 year of just as a broadcaster and kind of seeing how things work. But then as sports director, there is a lot of responsibility, and there's kind of a lot that goes on with executing these broadcasts that maybe people don't think about or just don't really um, I guess don't really notice behind the scenes in terms of making sure all the equipment works and making sure the recording software works. And I know we had our troubles with that when you were there. Is there's always seemed like there was something going on with the equipment or the recording software or the sportscast. Or something like that. But it was really, I mean, it was an absolute pleasure to lead a staff of so many kids that were so hardworking and so committed to play by play and getting better at play by play. And so I mean it was a great honor. I mean, scheduling the broadcast was definitely time consuming and kind of something that you had to be on top of in terms of making sure that the people who deserve the opportunities were given those, but also making sure that trying to get everyone who wanted to be involved as much as possible. And that's something that, like I said a little bit earlier, I loved about Miami is that you could come in as a freshman and later on that year you could be going on road trips for the baseball team. We had a kid this year, Luca Mucciardi, who came in as a freshman, worked his tail off, was very committed to getting better, and then he was um, he was on a baseball trip in March after coming in as a freshman. So seeing those type of kids come in and seeing them develop through the station was really cool to see. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty much like taking another class. Sometimes two classes at times. The underwriting aspect, which is for people who aren't familiar with the term, pretty much the commercials. That's that's a time consuming aspect, making sure that we have enough funding and making sure that we have enough relationships with businesses that we're able to kind of fund our road trips and stuff like that is definitely an aspect that I took a lot of pride in and making sure that those relationships were mutually beneficial for us and then for the local companies as well. And scheduling travel and sending out the schedules, communicating with the rest of the WVUM executive board to make sure that all of our broadcasts were going off smoothly with everything else that WVUM does. It was great, and I think it taught me a lot too about time management and keeping myself organized, and then how to be a leader too, and how to be a resource for younger people. I mean, when I was coming up as a sophomore, I would sit down with Brendan all the time to go over tape. And then having the chance to kind of sit down with some of the younger broadcasters and be in a position where I was able to give them some advice that I had once heard was a pretty cool full circle moment and was something that I never took for granted. It was definitely kind of one of the most beneficial and also just things that I enjoy most. One of the most special parts of being at Miami as a whole was being able to lead WVUM and all the talented broadcasters that we had.
Yeah, and that's great that you mentioned the whole story of it because there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and specifically with like having to get, at people to sell ads and stuff over the air. I mean, how was it like balancing those relationships, and did you have to have, meetings with the sponsors and be responsible for that, or was that more because you're in college, there's a university side that's covering that for you, or, just how was that like?
Yeah, so for us it was definitely a mix. I mean there was some budget that we were afforded, but what that wasn't necessarily set in stone. And of course it was a lot easier to kind of get some new equipment approved or some trips approved and reimbursed when when we did you could kind of show the school that all right, here is the money that we are bringing in just for sports underwriting, separate from the underwriting from the rest of the station. And because baseball, we are the flagship station and we do have a pretty good amount of listeners and a pretty loyal fan base. That was the one that we tried to capitalize on most. So that's one where we have the existing relationships that we have with businesses and contacts there, that you kind of just build a relationship with over time, staying in constant contact, being polite over emails, being receptive to any specific things that they want, in terms of new commercial reads or stuff like that. But also networking and going out and contacting new businesses as well. Um, it is kind of like sales, and it is kind of good experience, reaching out to different companies, kind of pitching why, it would be a mutually beneficial relationship for them to kind of join forces with WVUM, for some underwriting and some commercial reads and some live reads during the game and stuff like that. And then kind of just going from there. I mean, it teaches you a lot about organization in terms of making sure you've got everything set. The kind of sort of not necessarily contracts, but the paperwork that you got to send over. That was a good experience and something that was definitely good for me to learn. And I was lucky enough to have a couple people helping me out. Each semester I was there. Wyatt Kopelman was the underwriting director, and then, I had a couple of our other broadcasters, Andrew Klein, Gavin B. Show, Jake Baum, kind of helped me out as well once Wyatt graduated to kind of make sure that process was as smooth as possible. So I got to give them some credit as well.
Yeah, and that's great that you talked about that because, a lot of people out there that I think when you get to, especially a smaller market, I can understand there can be sales side of the whole thing, which isn't something that we particularly had from a lot of the time in Miami, but that's a whole like another avenue and a thing to learn about. And, moving forward, I guess what is your, if you could have your ideal fall, at the end of the summer, is there anything, you'd want to be doing by then in broadcasting, really like, in a personal project, whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm kind of in a position now, that I think a lot of people are in once they graduate in something like play-by-play, where you kind of just have to be patient a little bit, and kind of just work as many contacts and network with as many people as you know, which is kind of the process I'm in right now, kind of trying to hop on the phone with, as many broadcasters as I know in the industry and kind of gain some advice from them and kind of learn as much as I can. And I'm in the spot right now where I'm kind of considering what avenue I want to go in. But, I mean, in play by play, as you know, you're a kind of a semester removed from it now. Is that you've got to be flexible and you've got to kind of be willing to do whatever it takes and get reps at whatever level that may be, because there's no substitute, for reps. That's something that I'll say because I've heard it from so many people, and it's true. I'm in a spot right now where I'm kind of flexible, and I'll go get reps at whatever level that may be, and just try to push forward. And it's one that it's such a competitive industry, but, it was so rewarding in my time in Miami, and I'm sure it will continue to be, as I move on here. But, yeah, just patience, trying to be patient and trying to just kind of do whatever I can to kind of put myself in the best spot and kind of just control what I can control and go from there.
Yeah, well, I think you're definitely gonna find something to get rewarded at some point. I mean, I know personally speaking, I was in your shoes, what, 6 months ago, and then basically ended up. I don't think I got the official offer from Richfield until either late January or early February. So it can definitely be a grind out there, and you'll definitely be able to find something. But is there anything you want to shout out, or I guess like let us know what's going on that would be great for you moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a shout out to Gavin Bisho, who's taken over WVUM now, as the sports director of WVUM. Really excited to see what he does. With such an exciting group of broadcasters, and Gavin is someone that I felt extremely comfortable, handing things off to now that I've graduated, with everything that he has shown through his 2 years, and I'm sure will continue to show, as he moves on. And I'm excited to come keep an eye on WVUM, and of course tune in and listen now as I guess just a pure listener and a fan of the station. So I mean, I'm excited to keep an eye on that Miami Hurricanes football you would hope should have a good year, but I mean, you never know with Canes football recently. But I mean, I'm excited for that, and yeah, just I appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited to stay in contact, and I mean, just excited to keep listening to the announcers hour. I think it's a great broadcast you're doing, and having a whole bunch of people on is I know I've learned a lot just from listening to other episodes. So, I mean, appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot to ask is, do you have just because this cop popped up in my head, do you have the craziest game that you've ever broadcasted, and could you just recap that?
Definitely the craziest game that I've done. It was in Rochester. We did the longest 9 inning game in the 30 years of the Northwoods League. I don't even remember the final score, but it beat it by like I think a matter of seconds. It was a 4.5 hour 9 inning game, where I think we blew like multiple 3 run leads and ended up getting walked off on in Bismarck. But that was definitely the craziest game I've done. It was like I said, 4.5 hour 9 inning game in the era of the pitch clock. So there was the pitch clock in the Northwoods League, which made that even crazier. So that's definitely the one that stands out to me as the wackiest game that I've ever done.
Yeah, you never know what you're gonna see, and that's the greatest part of sports. I mean, well, one call, I know personally that I didn't tell really anyone about, but I did a practice rep at Grand Canyon on like, their baseball side. He was kind enough to let me come by and do practice reps while I was in Phoenix in the spring. And I kid you not, the first game was against Sacramento State, I think March 29th, and Connor Madison threw a no-hitter. So, I mean, I don't know. You just never know what you're going to see, and that's the exciting part of play-by-play. And so I know I've been on some crazy ones, so I always like to ask that question. But, you know, um, just anything else you want to add for it while I let you go?
I mean, just like I said, appreciate you having me on, and appreciate everyone who's listening. I hope I was able to give some sort of perspective and advice. I mean, me and Pat are both in the situation, and I guess everyone is, even the veteran. They're still learning and still working in this crazy industry. But like I said, I'm so excited to kind of see where the journey takes me.
Yeah, and again, that was Nick Marino with WVUM, former sports director at WVUM. Also spent time with the Rochester Honkers and the Northwoods League. Got a lot going on, and we'll have, you're going to see him soon out there on a big stage and broadcasting games. But Nick, thank you for joining me, and that about wraps up the Announcers Hour.